Thank you so much for this opportunity, and it's great to all get together and be able to talk about this. I'm just going to share my screen. So I'm going to talk about the process at Knox. And I just want to preface that we have now been using Brightpath. This is our 4th year of using it. So it's actually something that we've done. There's been a bit of a process to get to this point. So I'll talk about how our process at Knox, how we use Brightpath, and how we sort of the different phases of that implementation and how we got from the very beginning to where we are now. And as Sandy said, we're going to be talking about the challenges along the way as well. So these are the text types, I guess, for want of a better expression, that we use, that Brightpath has available. And in particular, in years 2 to 6, we utilise the narrative, the exposition and the information report. At the moment at Knox, we've been really focusing on the oral narrative in kindergarten. And in light of the new syllabus that's being implemented next year, we're going to look at utilising oral narrative across K to 2, because oral language is a huge focus of our new K to 2 English syllabus, as you would all know. We're hoping that poetry becomes available at some point as well, but we understand that there's so many different forms of poetry that would be quite difficult. So we initially started with year 5 as our pilot year, because this was a new form of assessment that we were looking at. And often when we implement something new into a school this size, we have one year group or one stage that we start with just to see how it goes, to sort of iron out any issues or concerns. And I know that talking to a lot of schools that are using Brightpath, one of the first questions that I'm always asked, and I don't know if you remember, Susan, but my first conversation with you, a lot of it was, well, hang on, where does writing rubrics fit in terms of Brightpath, and does that mean that we throw that out? And that's a lot of the questions that staff asked us when we initially started this. Where do writing rubrics fit? Should they still be used? Should they not be used? And really, we've come to the point where a writing rubric or a checklist can be quite useful for students to sort of just check in that they've got all the elements. But I'm yet to find a perfect writing rubric that has that gives us the information that we need. Nothing like what Brightpath gives us. One of the issues, obviously, is with writing rubrics is that things like spelling and grammar were often worth just as much as the purpose of writing and things like that, which are obviously much more of our big ticket items with writing. So at the moment, we've removed the rubrics and made it more into a checklist for our students. And we're using the teaching or the next steps in Brightpath instead, because we find it's much more effective. So the next phase after year 5 unpacked that was getting other year groups implementing Brightpath into our assessment. So we use it for our pre and post assessment. And right from the beginning, we used it to provide feedback to parents. And I'm actually going to talk about that in more detail later. The third phase, which is what we're in now within most of our year groups, is actually using the next steps or the teaching steps in our planning of our programs. So we sort of did that across 3 phases. So I just thought it was important to tell you that, just in case you're at the beginning stages of using Brightpath at the moment. So obviously within our process, the first step is pre-assessment at the start of a unit of work. It's really interesting. Often we do pre-assessments because we're used to doing our pre-assessments, but how often do we actually look at that data or look at that information to inform our planning? So that what we do with using Brightpath is we do a pre-assessment at the beginning of a unit of work, and this is before any sort of teaching of that particular writing has taken place, because we really want to see what our boys, we've only got boys here, what our boys know before any teaching, as I've said. So whole grade completes a pre-assessment prior to any teaching. Then we go through a moderation process. And this is probably something I really wanted to highlight, and I guess something that we do quite uniquely in terms of how we use Brightpath. Moderation, as we know, is best practice, but some of the challenges of that is finding the time to do that properly. And we worked out after using Brightpath for so long now, that if we didn't actually give that time, that purposeful time for moderating, that again, we had all this beautiful data that we'd collected, but we didn't have the time to use that data. For years, unfortunately, our school, as many schools, we had lots of data, kept it on the system and never looked at it again. So we spent some time, we took away team meeting times and said, this part is really important. We want to take the time to moderate. Now, when we initially moderate with the pre-assessment, this is just to show you with Brightpaths, I'm assuming that you guys are familiar with this, but we sit down as a team, and as you know, the Brightpath has a marking ruler down the middle, and you compare your writing to a set of exemplars that Brightpath provides you. Now, as a team, we actually look at the set of descriptors or dot points within each range or band, and we decide as a team what are our really big ticket items that we're looking for. And I know in some of those descriptor boxes, there could be up to 10 dot points, and Brightpath have made it really user-friendly in that often that's sequential. But to ensure consistency as a team, what we do initially is we might highlight the 3 or 4 that we're really focusing on within each range or band, so that as a team, we're not looking at a set of 10 dot points, we're looking at 3 or 4. And again, that created a lot more, once we decided to do that, that created a lot more consistency amongst our teams. And some of our teams in year 5 and 6 have 7, 8 staff members. So taking the time to make sure that there was consistency about what we were looking for was really important. Again, this really helped with us looking at writing as a whole. What did we want to see? If we're looking at a persuasive text, what is the most important thing that we want to see? And obviously the purpose is really important. So the whole idea of writing a persuasive text or an exposition is to persuade the reader. So is this child trying to engage with the reader? And are they using their tools like high modality, like reasons and expert evidence? Are they using those tools in order to persuade the reader? So it's not, we found that before, when we were relying just on rubrics, we were getting caught in the details of particular structure, like you might use peel in your persuasive paragraphs. And so it was like, because of a rubric, we might get stuck that that's the only particular way that you can write an exposition body paragraph. And so we came to realize that rubric was actually quite limiting, and boys could actually, or girls, could actually go beyond that or use a different recipe or structure to achieve that same writing purpose. And so narrowing these dot points, or really refining what we were looking for and what the most important thing was, really helped to get that consistency with marking. Our next step was cross-grade marking with multiple assessors. And this is something that, again, might be quite unique to our process compared to how other people do it. The reason why we cross-grade marking, so what I mean is we're not just marking our own class. There was quite a few reasons why we started this initially. One of the reasons was that we found, just like when you look at a piece of work and you might make initial judgments about handwriting, and that might sway your judgment of what a piece of writing looks like rather than actually looking with what's in there. We found that teachers, when they marked their own classes, would look at a name and automatically have in their head some sort of bias about what was going to appear there. So we found that the marking wasn't as consistent if people were marking their own classes. Now, when we started cross-grade marking, we also found some really nice hidden advantages that we didn't realise otherwise. When we found that we were cross-grade marking, so with multiple assessors, you'd end up with 5 or 6 samples from each different class. It gave our teachers a really good spread or understanding, I guess, of levels or focus areas, strengths across the entire grade. So rather than just looking at your particular class, you had a really good understanding of the whole cohort. And that was important because you might think that a child is doing really well in your class, but if you compare it to a cohort, you can see that there are areas to work on. It was just a really nice advantage to have a good understanding of the entire cohort. But what was even better than that, once you read 5 or 6 from each class, it was quite evident when you're reading an exposition or a narrative, you can almost by the 3rd or 4th, by the 5th, and certainly by the 6th sample, you can almost see how that lesson, what that lesson looks like in the classroom. So cross-grade marking, or the multiple assessors, we found started this really rich professional discussion. So teachers were saying things like, I noticed that in your expositions, you were starting with an emotive entry instead of just a rhetorical question. That was really effective. How did you teach that in your classroom, or what did that look like? Or I noticed in your narratives that your boys were really building tension within their narratives or their writing. And it was quite apparent that it was a strength within your class compared to the other classes. So what did that look like in your classroom? And this was one of the hidden advantages that we didn't anticipate. From that, we then had, as well as this professional discussion and conversation that was ongoing, we had teachers wanting to observe other teachers. You know, clearly you're really good at the conclusion. What does that look like? Do you mind if I come in and have a look? And so we had this really nice culture of learning from each other and finding the strengths. And then it ended up that we had masterclasses where, rather than teachers just saying, yes, come and observe, we had teachers saying, well, you could come and watch me doing that with my class, but how about I come into your classroom and I do it with your boys, so that the teachers could actually see that being taught to their students. We really, as a team too, then started recognizing that as teachers, we all have individual strengths. And so rather than just my particular class getting the advantage of my strength, I was then using the strengths of my entire team, and the whole cohort benefited from that. So if my particular strength was introductions, then we would have masterclasses, and I would actually take every year 5 class to introduce how to create an introduction. And a colleague would then look at exciting endings, or another colleague would look at building tension. Another colleague was obviously focusing a lot on really rich vocab and tier 2 language. And so we then asked them to do a masterclass for that. And so we found that by using the strengths of all of us as a team, again, the boys across the cohort benefited from that. Now, the next stage in the process, and again, please keep in mind that we're now 4 years into it, was actually using the teaching steps within our program. So again, we've marked the pre-assessment. What do we do with this data? We were really conscious that we didn't just want to have all of this rich information that just sat on the computer that we never looked at again. So after Brightpath gives you amazing information. After you have your pre-test, it tells you exactly where your students are sitting. And then you can see here, and this is just the teaching steps button on the platform. It literally tells you exactly what those students within that range need to learn next. So with our younger years, we look at those dot points, and we actually form that as part of our writing program. So rather than having the entire class focusing on the same thing, you would still, of course, have your explicit lesson, but then you would have boys focusing on particular things. So in our younger classes, the teachers would use this information to help structure their lessons and know what to focus on, because they would see where their boys were clustered. But in years 5 and 6, and this has been quite powerful, we've been doing this for the last sort of 6 to 12 months, we actually print this out for our students, and we might highlight 1 or 2 dot points at a time. And we'll say to our boys, we'll teach the explicit lesson, we'll model, we'll create writing as a class, so none of that changes. But then when the boys are doing their individual writing or they're doing something for homework, they would have this, and they would have, you know, for instance, the first 2 dot points highlighted, and we'll say, remember, that's what your area of focus is at the moment. So it's just like giving the boys really specific feedback. But here, Brightpath gives you that next steps in their learning. I'll just move this over. So as I said, Brightpath gives you really tailored feedback. So instead of just really vague feedback, you're providing really specific feedback, both to students and parents. Now, we don't give parents those dot points at that stage. However, as the boys are older, if they're using those as their learning goals, then that goes in their homework books and parents are aware. It does allow you to group students based on their writing strengths and areas of improvement if you want to create writing groups within your class, just like you would with reading. And Brightpath makes recommendations on what they're ready to learn. So it's much better than everyone in year 4 is doing this. It's much more of a personalised approach to learning, which is great, because as we know, all of our students in year 4 are not at the same level. All of our students at year 2 are not at the same level. And the great thing about the new syllabuses in K-2 is that they've formally recognised that students can actually be working at different stages at the same time. Now, I just wanted to say too that when you target the teaching like that, it obviously allows for more significant growth. Now, once we go through that process, the next step is obviously the post-assessment. Again, we repeat the cross-grade approach to marking. We find that we actually don't need to moderate at that point because we've taken so much time to moderate at the pre-assessment. But at this point, we do have like a marking buddy, because there's always 1 or 2 where you think, I'm just not quite sure whether they're in this range or this box or the next one above, or they've got a little bit of both. And so it's what we do at that stage is we just get a couple of people to either double mark or we discuss that. And then the final step is reporting to parents. And I think this part has been probably the game changer for us in terms of writing assessment. So previously, excuse me, previously we reported to our parents in our formal reporting process, obviously. And as you know, on a formal report, your students will have a grade for writing and then an overall grade for English. But what we found with this was we may have students that have, I'll just go to the next slide. We really like the student growth report for our parents. And we find that our students may have been an A for writing. They may be an A for writing the whole way through. However, that doesn't really give you much information. What we found by providing this, I've just had to block out some of the information, but this student here in persuasive writing was scoring 420 by the end of term 2. But then you can see his narrative writing is at 470. So this is a student that's an A student on a traditional report, but there is quite a difference. So this shows that his narrative writing or descriptive writing is a strength compared to his persuasive writing, which at a year 5 level may not be significant. However, we felt that as they get older, that difference may become more significant. And so our parents really appreciated the difference because, I mean, I've highlighted one where there's a little bit of difference, but some of our students had a difference of 200 in their scores, depending on the type of text that they were writing. And again, none of that information can be as visible on a traditional report. So parents loved seeing the growth. It's a beautiful, easy report to look at. And again, really specific information about what they're doing well and what they need to work on. So that's the process that we take. I'm just having a look at the questions to see if there's anything. How much time did you provide for teachers to moderate? So quite a bit of time at the beginning. So 1 to 2 hours really at the pre-assessment stage, which I know is quite significant. But then we found that at the post-assessment stage, we didn't need to moderate anymore because we had used that purposeful time to get a lot of consistency.
Okay, so I'm from Spring Hill Primary School, so I'm going to talk about the journey that we've had with Brightpath since implementing it. Our journey commenced back in 2019. So why did we go to Brightpath? So initially, our school was working across 2 different writing programs, one with the K-2s and then working in the 3 to 6 space. And we had some staff, a small group of staff trained in each that were delivering that information to the rest of the staff and their cohorts. However, the staff that hadn't actually physically been to the training found that they didn't know the programs well enough to be able to implement it effectively in the classroom. So there were always lots of uncertainty and questions along the way. We also had some staff, we've had some staff turnover each year, and we were finding when we had the new staff coming in, they were feeling quite overwhelmed with not only getting to know a new school, but also having to develop an understanding of how to deliver a program that they weren't aware of. So there was lots of questioning. There was a lot of reliance on one staff member within their teams to support them. And it became a very much a focus on the teacher learning how to deliver this program and understand this program as opposed to what the students were doing, what they knew, and be able to support their learning. So that led to us to change our focus, and we moved our focus from the teachers learning the programs to then more about the students and developing their writing skills through targeted instruction, and Brightpath became the driver for that. So to be able to roll it out effectively across the school, we followed a gradual release model where initially we went with a getting to know you phase. And in that phase, it was essentially presenting the staff with the videos that are available on the Brightpath website, just familiarising them with what it was, what it looked like, what was available for them to use to gain an understanding. And we just encouraged the staff to have a bit of a look at it, have a bit of a play with it. There was no real expectation of its use as such, more just an expectation of exploration among staff. We then moved into the shared phase. So staff were provided with opportunities to practice using Brightpath. So we moved from showing videos and introducing them into more targeted professional learning that could support them to understand how it's going to help them in the classroom with where they're understanding where their students are at as far as their writing went, and also how it's going to support them then progressing the students with their development within writing and their skills. We then moved into the guided phase. So we have the English consultant and lead markers across the school that are there to support the staff. And that's ongoing and has continued now for a few years. And of course, we will offer professional learning as well, just to give those refreshers. And as new staff come in, they're familiarised with it, but they've also, not only are they seeing what we're presenting, but they have got those support people in place to help them along their journey to implementing it in the classroom also. We then moved into that independent phase. So the expectation now, it's embedded. Brightpath is used across the school to assess the student writing. The data that they collect from that is used to understand what the students are able to do. And then, of course, the teaching points are there to support with the planning as to what we're going to do to progress those students. And it's a differentiated model across the classroom, depending on where the students are at. And again, the support is continually provided, and it might be on an individual basis, or it might also be in a cohort level where somebody goes in. Because we're quite a large school, so we've got almost 800 students in the school. We've got generally 4 classes per year level. So there's 4 team members generally in the teams. So there's a lot of good quality conversation and data that can come up as well.
Sorry, Will, can you move the slide for us?
So at the commencement of our process, of implementing Brightpath, we developed a schedule of assessments. So each year we would have 4 assessments across the term. So across the year. So there'd be 1 per term, and we asked staff to engage with them. We provided them with some requirements that are needed, so they knew exactly what they were going to do. So there was consistency in the way in which the assessments were going to be delivered. And by providing them with a narrative in, for example, term 1 and term 3, and then the persuasive in term 2 and term 4, they were able to then look at that data and monitor the progress of the students within those particular genres. To also support staff, we've taken information from Brightpath and just simplified it into almost a cheat sheet, so that staff can refer to that to support their judgments when they're making judgments of students' writing, and also to assist in that moderation process as a quick cheat sheet to pull out and have a look at the skills that we should be looking for when we're assessing, and looking at those, what some of the terms that are in the descriptors also mean, to support that understanding when we're assessing and moderating as a team. And then we have the descriptors and teaching points. So we essentially, it's exactly the same information that we've provided to staff. It's just in that simple table format. And again, the descriptors are there to identify the skills that the students are demonstrating through their written work. And then the teaching points are there to support them as to what they're going to teach. It's also very useful, of course, when it comes to reporting time, because you can give reference then to, well, this is what I'm seeing in the writing, and tick that box. And then, of course, identify the learning goals that the students are working towards moving forward. So not only are they having those conversations in the classroom, but they're able to have those conversations with the parents as well of what the kids are working on as they move forward in their writing journey. So we identified that it's really important to have some experts in the school. So we felt that, you know, we can all stand at the front and take turns delivering information, but we wanted to gain staff trust, that we've got staff that really understand Brightpath and how it works. So we've currently got 5 staff in the school that are recognised as Brightpath lead markers. We felt that then by having that certification, they can actually go out and they've got that knowledge, and staff can be assured that they're providing them with the correct information, not only when we're presenting in professional learning, but also when they're supporting in moderation or in one-on-one support as well. The lead markers have completed, we've got some in narrative, some in persuasive, and then this year we've got a couple more that are going out to do the lead marker assessment for informative texts as well, so that we can we've got a range of genres that we can then be supporting across the school. So the challenges that we've experienced and have overcome, so there have been some little bumps along the way, and they've been quite simple to iron out, but I felt that it's quite important to highlight those, because understanding things that you come across that have made it a little bit more difficult, we can work around it to make it more workable in the school. So the teacher-made rubrics was something that staff were really reliant on. So I guess it's been a part of their practice for a long time. So actually removing them proved to be quite difficult, and a lot of staff were doing both. So they were using their teacher-made rubrics to assess the piece of writing, and then they were also using the Brightpath ruler. So they were doubling up on their workload. So it was actually sitting down with the staff then to talk about, well, it's not necessary to be doing that. Looking at why, looking at the benefits of what we're getting out of doing the two. So there's that common understanding now that the Brightpath ruler actually gives us all the information that we need, and that making your own writing rubric is not essential when we're assessing students' work. Having common understanding of information and achieved scale scores. So understanding that the achieved scale score is providing us with that detailed information of the skills that they're achieving. And when we go back then and we look at the curriculum and identify what it is our kids should be achieving at that level as well, it gives us that full picture of where the kids are actually working out, where they should be working towards, and what they're achieving. And we can use Brightpath. There's a lot of resources on Brightpath where we look at the progress graphs that are available, and also go and look at what grades that they're identifying as within the scale score that they've received. But we found that some teachers were just relying on, I need a grade. When I'm assessing this piece of work, I need to know if it's an A, B, C, D, etc. So we've done a lot of work in that space to remove the reliance upon, I just want a grade for that piece of writing, and it's more about understanding the data that I'm getting from that writing about that student, and then the teaching points on how I'm going to progress and move them forward. Scanning and uploading of student writing samples. So at the very beginning of our journey, staff were quite overwhelmed about the fact that they've not only trying to learn this program, but now I've got to go and scan these pieces of work, and I'm not sure how to do it. So we actually removed that at the beginning of the journey, and we employed an EA who came in and would scan all of the writing samples for the staff. And it just took away that little bit of extra work that came along just while we were learning it. And now that we've become much more familiarised and it's become part of our practice, staff find it very simple, very quick process to scan and upload them. Some of them even use their phone, and some of them are talking about convincing Brightpath to maybe come up with an app Coming up with an
Kai Russell,
I hear that.
programmers.
Yeah.
He's listening. Another thing for your list, Kai.
There you go.
Yeah, it's on a very long list.
Yeah, so they were saying beneficial if we could take a photo on the app, and then it uploads automatically into the folder for assessment. And moderation, which I know was just spoken about previously. So making time for moderation, because schools are a busy place. Moderation, it's hard to fit it in when we're feeling time poor. So it's offering those opportunities, whether it's on a staff development day, whether it's during a staff meeting time, or enabling common doc time. So the last couple of years we've ensured that all of our cohorts have got multiple common doc times across the working week, so that they have got that time to touch base and moderate. And along the way, we've also had those opportunities where we've crossed cohorts as well. So we've mixed up the staff. So we might have one from 2, 5 and 6, so that we can see what the students are doing within those year levels and understand what the assessments look like and the grading. And that's me.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just to give you a little bit of background, who we are, Salvato Catholic College, we're actually what we call a foundation school in the Catholic education. We're on the southern parameter of the Perth metro area, and we are foundation in the sort of the way that we were built and opened in 2016, and we started with a very small number of students. Now, 6 years later, we have 626 students. So the pace that we're keeping up, a lot of our time is interviewing, getting new staff on, marketing, getting new students. It's a growing area. The demographic is quite interesting. It's 1,041. So we have a real mixed cohort of students coming from different backgrounds. Significant EALD students, a huge percentage that is actually starting to grow. Students with disability is starting to grow, and the number of Aboriginal students also starting to grow. Slide change. Great. This was actually taken on board with the school when it was new in 2017, so 1 year after it opened. There were some reasons behind. One of the big reasons was that it was new to Catholic education. Catholic Education WA were very interested in seeing how Brightpath rolled and did a lot of promotions amongst the schools. We also have SCASA, who also takes and still continues to take a very keen interest in Brightpath. So that was one big tick in the right box. We had an ongoing, with new staff coming on, we have ongoing transition of staff, confidence in assessing, and something that was affirming to help us feel confident, but also learn where else we could go with this. That was actually a good thing. Keeping the same lens, again, growing continuously. It was very easy to lose the momentum if we didn't stay right on board with this. Students, identifying where students are, again, we have now got to a stage where we're very privileged to have a double cohort through from kindy through to year 6. We also have year 7s and 8s going from a pre-kindy through to year 12 eventually. It'll be 2026, I think, before we get year 12s, but we're on that journey. The research-based accuracy was also a big weight that kept us in this field. And while it was just more of a piloting process in the early years, it has now become a concrete part of our assessment schedule on an annual basis. Thanks, Will. Going on to this, I sort of just mentioned a couple of things there. We noticed that there was a difference between the authorial and the secretarial features of writing in particular. We did a couple of activities where we just brought the staff together and we talked about, if you were sort of holistically marking a piece of work, what would you be looking for? And it came out that the secretarial side of things, the conventions, was a little bit heavier than the authorial side. So there was a need that was brought in there. We've gone into looking at the moderation timetabling. That has been an ongoing issue, and the bottom line is moderation is compliance for all schools across Australia. So it's something we can't neglect. Getting onto that space has been something that we continually try to refine and define to make sure it's kept up and it's timed very well. The other challenges I think here is getting the timetabling, and you've got lots of individual staff with individual programs, and they want to focus on certain genres at certain times. Comparing that to the WA curriculum, and that's also been something we've had to constantly nut out. But again, I think the best thing that we ever did, to be perfectly honest, is at the end of 1 year, that's when we start planning for the next year, and it gives the teacher, once we've come to a decision, and this isn't a leadership decision, this is something we do as a whole school, it's actually helped us plan ahead, and so the teachers can map out where we're going in the following year. Just to go through some wins, we've gradually picked up a number of wins over this time. We found that having the same lens to go through and view things, similar to what we've just heard, in that we've had teachers come up and realise, oh, I'm teaching this, but I'm neglecting that, I'm marking too hard or I'm marking too soft. So there's been a lot of wins in the face that we're getting, that affirming side that we're on target. We're coming within a relative good range of what the NAPLAN scores are when we're doing different activities. The big picture, I've noticed actually from our audience that there is 1 or 2 people there with data walls behind them. If you're looking at data walls, etc., that sort of thing, is this is a data wall in itself. So what we've done is come in at the beginning of the year, and we're looking at doing a whole school, and this is pre-primary through to year 6, and actually tomorrow is the first time we'll be using our year 7s. They've joined on board. We have the blessing of being able to make that seamless progression into the secondary context. Having everybody on the one page on their check-in and their check-out, or what they're bringing to the table, that's been a bonus, because again, like I've mentioned before, a lot of new students are coming on board on an annual basis. Upskilling, it's not just been the focus on the authorial sides that we've noticed, looking at how we can have a more even keeled lens when we're marking. We've recognised things like paragraphing. It's come up over the years. So that's been a bigger focus recently as well. And especially once they go into the secondary, it's a huge element, especially when we're doing your compliance, your NAPLANs, etc. That's all showing up. We've found our conversations have been more robust as well. We're challenging each other, but in a very balanced way. There's a little diagram there up in the top right-hand corner. This was actually something that was brought to our attention a few years ago. And even though it's common sense to us to understand that we have the grading A, B, C, D, E, you've got C levels and C within a bracket. A C by itself, when you're looking at families, it's a C, but if you pull it apart a little bit, you've got your high C's, your middle C's, your lower C's. So high C in year 2 would be probably equate to around a middle level C in year 4, and so on. So that helped bring a bit more clarity to us, because some people were finding that a little bit confusing.
Thanks, Will.
Okay. Some of the handy hints we've come across as well. We've been able to co-assess and co-plan. We've been through the single stream area where we've grouped year levels together to help have that lens across year levels. But now that we're in a double stream situation, perfect if you've got triple or quad streams, that's even better. But it actually helps us group people together so that we can work through and plan, and no one's left isolated by themselves. You can, and we have created mini clusters. So we've got our early years, our junior years, and our middle years. The handwriting, if you're doing handwriting, these are just basic things that we found over the years. Handwriting, if you're actually not doing the using the keypads, their handwriting, use dark pencil, use lined paper, write on one side, not the other side, because you're scanning. Someone's actually pointed out that, you know, have a namespace so that, you know, top right-hand corner, allocate an area for children to put their name on it, just so it's easy to find and there's no forgetting. A really good point that was brought up by another staff member, increasing the DPI when you're scanning, and that's your darkness, your lightness, put it on the darkest, because some pencils just simply don't scan that brilliantly. These are a little help things. The typing we've started taking up in the middle upper primary side of things. That is like a dual skill that children are taking on board in general anyway. So we also focus on the fact that we're not grading or marking or assessing the typing in this regime. It's how they're writing their piece, but it's giving them that familiarity with getting onto the iPads or onto the keyboards. Auto marking, we've been doing a little bit of that too recently, and what we do like about it, hasn't been around for that long, but it brings you into a happy space. And this is if you're using the keypad, it brings you into an area that is within the range of where that piece would be. It does take the human element to sort of look into the authorial sides a little bit deeper and add that, but it really does get you into a right space if you're finding it hard to find your kickoff point. The maths, we've been doing a bit of that too recently. We've had pilot teachers for a couple of years, you know, your go-getters that like to dabble with new ideas. And the best thing that's happened in that is looking at the data that you produce. It is amazing. It's very, very specific and it's very clear. We are also a school that use MAI assessments across our primary, and we are literally currently in the conversation at the moment as to whether to pull back on the MAI assessments and move more into the Brightpath maths because of the quality of the information, but also the time savviness of it. You distribute this as a lesson and you do it with the whole cohort, whether it be across your year level or just in your class. But it takes about an hour, whereas the MAI assessments, that was a one-to-one, and it would take up to an hour sometimes just for one child, which isn't working that great. So we've also got samples online. There's the concept, if you've got children using the digital side of things, take off your predictive texts, etc., and autocorrects, which is maybe common sense for some, but I know I didn't think of that and it kind of jumped on me. Thank you. More wins, opportunities to goal set and differentiate. That's a huge impact. Differentiation has been a word that we've bounced around quite a lot over recent years, but this has given us the opportunity to mix groups, get data that shows bubbles of groups, show children, and depending on the age, what targets, what goals to set for themselves, what goals the teachers can set. They can map it over their program over a term, over a semester, over a year. The end of year, like I mentioned previously, we bring the whole staff together to go through our whole assessment timetable over all the year levels, and Brightpath has come into this as an important part of that. And we do get to have conversations about how we're going to make it fit what we're going to be doing in the year ahead. The judgment process, this has been a very interesting process as well, in that we've done a lot of and built it into our staff meetings every term. It just depends on what's going, and we do activities where we might use the exemplars, or we might use pre-marked samples, and we'll get groups of people in mixed groups, sometimes in similar year groups, sometimes in secondary and early primary and middle mixed, and they come and have conversations about where they think that piece of work fits, what order they think, and that gives them the familiarity on the genres that we happen to be looking at the time. It also creates that same lens. The teacher-to-teacher activities I was just mentioning then, we do mix teachers for moderation as well. Sometimes we get people to sit in similar year groups, and sometimes we mix it up. Student activities, there are certain teachers that are moving forward with having photocopies of the exemplars within the range that their year group would be up on the wall, and having children sort of moderate their own work to work out and do it in pairs or small groups, have discussions about where they think their work is and what they think their work could be doing. We've also got the students identifying the differences as well. So there's a lot of opportunity out here. Where to from here? Well, we're going to continue again because we've continued growing, and now that we've taken Year 7s on board, this is going to add another layer onto things. So we're looking at the scaffolding, using the data, like was mentioned before. You do run into the situation where you action, you grade, you timetable that on board, you might collaborate, but then using the data effectively afterwards, where you're focusing that over the last few years to make sure that we're making the most out of that information. The teacher needs to be robust and be able to process that information, but the year levels and the school needs to take that on board when they're doing their curriculum planning as a whole school. We've got the Year 7s participating in the 2022 due to the identified fast tracking. We're also having conversations about sprints from the point that we're starting to group children into bubbles and looking at how we can access a sprint philosophy and making sure that we're moving forward and the children are meeting their needs, and we've been able to focus and articulate what we need to do next. We're recognising the learning intentions and the success criteria. That's another thing that we've been working with as well. And when you look at the to teach next information and the other information, they do balance out to being your learning intentions, what we'll teach next, and then on the next level is like the success criteria. So that's proving to be quite useful. A lot of teachers are simply copying and pasting the information that Brightpath provide us and embedding that into their teaching and their learning plans. The trial staff, we've got, again, we've been allocating the multi-purpose marking, or the assessors on myself. I might join someone who's new and we might co-mark, but we are looking at mixing it up so that we, again, crossing across all year levels. So having a Year 6 teacher looking at a Year 1 sample, a Year 3 sample, a Year 5 sample. So that's where we're going with that as well.